welcome to this new Tech Captains podcast where we explore the frontiers of technology and innovation. I'm Ron Dannenberg and joined by my co host Gareth Thomas. In today's episode, we're excited to welcome Ryan Bell, threat intelligence manager at Corvus Insurance. So Ryan's journey in cybersecurity spans roles at Titra Defense, Risk IQ. You'll tell us more in a minute, where he specialized in detecting and mitigating complex cyber threats. His expertise extends into digital forensics and data-driven solutions for global challenges. It's a lot of buzzwords you can help us with later on. And so, with a rich academic background from, if your LinkedIn is up to date, the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Oxford, UK, as well as an entrepreneurial venture that was quite funny to read. Ryan brings a unique blend of technical acumen and business insight. So we're thrilled to have you today, Ryan. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
You're welcome. It's nice to have you. So, like, maybe to start, like, can I ask you, like, what do you do exactly?
Great question. I'm still figuring that out myself. Yeah, threat intelligence can be whatever you want it to be. It's a lot. What are bad guys doing on the internet? How can we get as far ahead of them as possible? So I work for a cyber insurance company called Corvus. Cyber insurance is not a thing I knew existed until just the past several years, but there is insurance for cybersecurity. So my role there is what are bad guys doing? How can we get one step ahead of them? And how can we protect any of our insured, the people that we write uh, cyber insurance for? Because we want to prevent their worst day of their career, which is having a cyber attack, and also bad day for Corvus as well when our folks have cyber attacks. So it can involve a lot of things, looking at new vulnerabilities, looking at what bad guys are up to in dark web forums. It's a very variable role, which I like about that. So that's the
So
high level.
is it more like research about what's going on in the tech world, or is it really investigating insights and trying to find loopholes in the security at Corvus?
It's more of the external side. So it's what new trends are there with threat actors? Like, ooh, they're exploiting this thing. Do any of our policyholders have that thing? We can like get in touch with them, tell them about it. It's talking with the underwriters here. Underwriters are the people who actually write those insurance policies we have, saying, hey, here's some trends we're seeing on the dark web. Maybe we can look differently at how we evaluate risk because of that. So if there's companies that have this specific vulnerability, maybe we can make sure they have this control to prevent them from having a cyber attack. Even if they don't write a policy with Corvus, some of those insights can help them better their cybersecurity posture. So tons and tons of research. I do work with our internal security team, so it is
Okay,
helping make sure Corvus also stays safe, but it's kind of the threat intel guy for the thousands of businesses we write insurance for as well.
I see. And how technical really is that role? Because your background is in sociology and computer information, which is not computer science. So tell us.
Yeah, and I have a very interesting long story to get into tech. So I'm not the most technical person of all. It's more learning quickly on the fly. There's tons of new vulnerabilities out there. A lot of them in products never have heard of before. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the Clop ransomware group. They're just one of those ransomware gangs this year that they found some zero-day vulnerabilities in something called Move It, which is a file transfer and storage solution. So maybe with your bank, you upload a document to get a mortgage, it might go to something like Move It. So that way you can like save your
Hmm.
application, access it later. So this ransomware group found an exploit in that thing. I'd never heard of that before ever. So as a threat intel guy, obviously we're like, oh no, this is a big deal. What is this? How does this exploit work? Which is very technical. You have to read through like the code of how the exploit's working, how people are really making this happen and exploiting this vulnerability. So it can get very technical. It can be learning on the fly as well. So
So if I understand correctly, you do a lot of research, like scrolling online, clicking everywhere, going in dark places, reading what's going on, official reports, non-official reports, and then you condense everything and you share it with your team internally. Is that accurate?
there is a lot of that. We also collect our own data. So we're collecting dark web data on who gets hit by ransomware. We're scraping that all together. We're looking at insights on like, are there any trends in who gets targeted? that we can learn from. So there's a bit of data analysis in there as well. So there's the research part, there's the data analysis research part. It can look like all sorts of different stuff. But yeah, you're right. We take that raw data, whether it's from clicking through dark web forums or analyzing data, and then condensing that into actionable intelligence to then present to our team.
It sounds like a very interesting job, actually, very multifaceted. Then, really, so you're providing a public service in terms of looking at the sort of the threats out there in general for businesses. Then you're providing help to the internal teams at Corvus, and then you're also providing potentially help to Corvus's customers, right? So that's a really, I didn't realize that kind of role even existed. That's very interesting.
It doesn't. I think they made it for me. I'm just a person who needs a lot of variety in my life, so it's the perfect
It's
role
nice
for
to have
me
a role
in
made
that sense.
for you, though. I like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And all of our stuff is public as well. So when we are
Right.
investigating these vulnerabilities, we're writing it up, we're sharing it with everybody. So our insureds, but anyone else as well. We want that research to, we don't want bad guys to win, no matter who it is.
Right. All right.
So how do they judge your effectiveness by how many threats you find? Because you might start creating them yourself.
Oh, I hope not. But yeah, yeah, a little metric hacking going on there. Yeah, looking back, it is a lot of what threats did we alert on? Did we miss anything? Did we have any claims for threats that
Yeah.
we didn't flag ahead of time? So yeah, we get judging threat intel can be difficult, but there are creative ways to do it. And that is one way we sort of grade ourselves is did we identify the things we should have?
How does it work like after internally? Because I suppose there is at least an IT team at Corvus, but is there an actual tech team that implements the changes, or is it usually through third parties and suppliers that this happens?
We have a big, very sophisticated tech team. So we do most of that stuff internally, which is cool. So we're able to just sort of work together to make that stuff happen. Corvus is a very tech driven place. So
Okay.
we can do all that stuff pretty much in house.
And you were talking about Klopp, and so I was reading. I think it was a video that you did earlier this year, and you were talking about. I think it was done, like April or May time, because you were talking about how in the first quarter of the year there'd been a big increase in ransomware attacks. I think that was this Klopp group, right, that were behind that. So one thing I'm wondering is now, obviously, we're almost to the end of this year. So the first question is, has that trend stood up through the year? Have you seen this big increase in ransomware continuing?
Absolutely. We are actually looking back at all the numbers. Obviously, as we're wrapping the year up, and 2023 was just wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was previously 2021 was the big year for ransomware. 2022 things kind of decreased a little bit, maybe as a bit of Russia Ukraine, maybe it was government sanctions, who knows. 2023 came back with a vengeance. So, yes, you are correct. In Q1, Klopp hit a mass exploit. We called that out. They did it again just a couple months later. So, at least 2 times this year, they were on the cutting edge of finding a new vulnerability and then exploiting it in mass. So typically, ransomware groups are kind of one step behind, like state sponsored threat actors who are better equipped financially and technologically will find new cutting edge vulnerabilities. And then that code will leak, and then ransomware groups will pick it up down the road later. But this was a pretty rare case of a ransomware group actually coming up with the vulnerability exploit themselves, which we don't see very often. But at least 2 times this year, we did see that. That did drive a big spike in numbers.
Because obviously there are the state-sponsored actors that you mentioned. So Clopper, they're just an affiliated bunch of individuals that have found each other on the dark web, and they're sort of geographically dispersed, are they?
Yeah, and folks are always surmising ties to different government entities. I can't speak to that with CLAP, but we do know they're a small, tight knit, nimble, and very technologically advanced group who just folks that know each other and work together to pull off these sort of operations.
And one thing that's quite important, I don't know if it has been made clear so far in the podcast, is that Corvus Insurance is actually a smart cyber insurance solution. I mean, that's what at least the tagline says. It's not a health insurance or anything like that. It's really cyber insurance. So I don't know if you can dig deeper into like, I mean, it explains better why somebody like you is needed when you sell insurance, cyber insurance solution. You need to be at the best yourself, but like if you can explain exactly what kind of insurance is it exactly.
Yeah, so cyber insurance is just trying to mitigate as much of the risk as possible of the unknown happening in the cyberspace. So if anyone from a small dentist's office to large tech startups are obviously online and have a presence and need some sort of protection against that unknown case in which they're exploited, their systems are taken down, they're not able to conduct business, all their data is, who knows, data is deleted. Our role is to help prevent the worst possible thing from happening, which is the company having to go out of business because of that. So we work with vendors that will help get people back online. Obviously, there's the financial aspect of that as well. It's insurance. So our job is just to prevent bad things from happening in cyberspace and then get people back on their feet when bad things do happen, much like you would think of health or auto insurance, just for
So
cyber.
so does Corvus also have like a consultancy branch where they advise the clients on what to do so they never need to claim that insurance?
We do have a cyber advisory team, and they'll meet with anybody, like any of our clients, people who potentially want to become clients, on what they can do to not have a breach. But if there is a breach, they're
Okay.
also there to coach them through it, get them the help they need, and then coach them afterward as well. Make sure it doesn't happen ever again.
So tell us now, like, what are the top three things to do in my company to avoid ever getting a ransomware or breach?
Yeah, so from this year, what we've seen is just an aggressive patch cadence. These vulnerabilities have just been out of control this year with threat actors. So new vulnerability comes out, especially anything that's internet facing. So making sure that you know sort of what your attack surface looks like, what you look like from the outside, basically, and then patching that as soon as possible. So if you use a VPN, if you use a gateway, all that stuff, just to make sure you're up to date. Then MFA is huge, and not just any sort of MFA. There's more advanced forms now, the phishing resistant, the FIDO2, because bad guys have found ways to get around even multi-factor authentication by tricking people into, like, you get that little push notification on your phone, just tricking people into accepting that when they're really the ones trying to log in from 2,000 miles away. And then EDR, which is endpoint detection and response, another huge one, just to have that rolled out all throughout your organization. If you're working remotely or on premise, just gives you better visibility in what's happening on each computer across your organization. So those are three pretty low hanging fruit that are pretty doable to implement for companies and help a lot.
I actually hadn't heard of endpoint detection and response till I saw your blog or an article you'd written, I think it was. So maybe can you explain a little bit more about what that actually is and why it would be good for companies to use a service like that? Because I think that would be quite interesting.
Sure. Yeah. So when people think of like antivirus protection, you think of McAfee or whatever from the 90s, which are designed to detect signatures. So it's got a big database of hash values or what have you for malware or bad things. If it sees that on your computer, it's going to shut it down. But we know obviously there's a lot of obfuscation that takes place. Bad guys are changing their code base so that those signatures aren't as reliable to detect. So EDR is typically designed to do behavioral based detection, where it will say things like, okay, we shouldn't have this thing spawning from this process. Like, that shouldn't happen. If we see that, that's probably a bad thing. It's a lot of them are using AI based training in order to like better dynamically detect threats, even as bad guys. It's obviously not perfect. Everyone thinks, ooh, it's AI, it's perfect. Like, not necessarily. It's just using a lot of heuristics, a lot of good training to say, okay, this shouldn't be happening on this computer. We're going to flag an alert, or we're going to, in some cases, even automatically quarantine, or there's some that will roll back. If you're encrypted, that helps a lot. So there's a few different services that provide that, but that's broad strokes what EDR typically is.
And so, and I'm guessing it's looking at things like port activity, unusual port activity. I mean, it's got data about times of the day, days of the week, the things that it would expect to see versus seeing something that's unusual, right? Or a port that suddenly starts being used that hasn't been used before, which might indicate, a backdoor's been dropped in somewhere. I'm guessing it's doing all that kind of stuff, is it?
Rather than the port, it's more so on like your individual machine. So it would be on your laptop specifically, and it would say like, oh no, there's this thing is running from Gareth's folder where stuff shouldn't be running from. It's going to flag and be like, that looks like a bad backdoor. Based on what it knows from lots of training with malware, what a backdoor typically would look like, it's going to see something and be like, this looks like a backdoor.
Okay.
So yeah, it's typically on it's called endpoint detection because it's on all the endpoints on all the individual laptops, desktops, etc. Just gives you better visibility into like what's running on Gareth's computer and should that all be there and be happening.
Yeah.
And I want to go back a bit in time, Ryan, and if you can tell us then, how does someone who studies sociology for a few years end up in cybersecurity?
Absolutely, yeah. So again, I winding past end up into tech. I started in psychology, realized I liked groups of people more. That was more compelling to me to explain behavior. So I jumped into sociology and quickly realized my job prospects were pretty bleak. So I picked up digital forensics as a second undergraduate degree, thinking, okay, sociology is fun and interesting, but if I need a job, I can go get one in digital forensics if I have this other degree. Didn't learn my lesson, ended up doing a master's in sociology, which took me to the UK, which was tons of fun. And I accidentally got exposed to data science there in that graduate degree. They were very technologically advanced. They was very stats driven. So they were like, cool, here's Python, here's Stata. We're going to run some numbers and stuff, which at the time was stressful, but ended up being really good, learning how to code a little bit. So after that experience, I got my first role in cyber, kind of like, all right, well, I like groups of people. I like how they think. I also like coding. So threat intelligence kind of makes sense. It's like, what are bad guys doing? The sociology aspect. And then like, how are they doing it? The technological aspect. So that's kind of how I roundabout found my way into threat intelligence coming from sociology. It's been super useful, again, because it's like groups of threat actors on the internet. That's sociology. It's fascinating.
That's interesting. I mean, it's true that cyber threat is sociology. It's humans at the end that are behind piloting everything, right?
Yeah. Human behavior is driven,
And
isn't it?
Absolutely.
and I also like when the guests on the show give us like a fun or horror story. But for you, I think if you tell us about you were in high school about 10 years ago and you had a side business selling bagpipes and drums, is that why you came to the UK after?
In a way, yes. So I went to a high school in the United States that had a bagpipe band. Just for anyone that is not familiar with the United States, that's not very common. Like
But
we
it's not common
we
anywhere. Don't worry.
oh, okay, good. Yeah, yeah. Somehow loved that, fell into playing bagpipes and drums, and I found out that you could get stuff cheaper if you got a business license. You could buy wholesale bagpipe parts. So I was like, cool. Hey mom, I need a business license. I'm 16. I can't like, can you sign up for, can you like co-sign this for me? She was super cool. So she did it. So I got my business license so I could get bagpipe parts cheaper. But then ended like all my friends would be like, hey man, I need this new bagpipe bag. Sheepskin would be great. And I was like, cool, you got it. Order it from Nova Scotia or whatever. So it just kind of turned into a business that for a 16-year-old kid made some decent money. So it was really fun too. Just
It's funny.
because
Some
bagpipers are,
some high school students deal drugs, but you deal bagpipes.
yeah, they were doing the crack pipe. I was doing the bagpipe. Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
funny.
And
Are so loud though, aren't they? They're so incredibly loud, bagpipes. It's unbelievable.
they are. Yeah. There are some indoor ones that are a little quieter, but not super common. Yeah. Everyone seems to love bagpipes.
I lived in Scotland for a while, and the apartment I lived in, there was a if you can imagine a road, there's two blocks of apartments and a road between them, a 2-lane road. And we were in our flat one day, my wife and I, we could hear these bagpipes playing, and we were thinking the guy was in the same building. He was on the other side of the street in the apartment opposite with all the windows closed. We could see him marching up and down with his bagpipes, and you could hear them in our flat with all the windows closed. I mean, the things are just unbelievably loud, unbelievably loud.
Yeah. Don't quote me on the history of it, but I think they were designed for war. So it makes sense why
Yes,
they're supposed
probably.
to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. They are very loud. Yeah. And there's in Glasgow every year, the World Bagpipe Championships. I kid you not. That's a real thing. So if
Yeah.
you're ever in Glasgow in August, go check that out.
There's another thing like we do in usually when we have a guest here. Like every single guest, we've asked to recommend a book, and the one you send us in advance of the podcast is called "Range: Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World" by Daniel Epstein. So, can you tell us more about this book and why this one?
Yeah, this book is like chicken noodle soup for the soul for me because again, I have been, it feels like wandering to where I've gotten, and that can feel scary sometimes. I think a lot of people feel behind because you look at like Mark Zuckerberg invented Facebook when he was 26 or whatever. Tiger Woods started golfing when he was 2 years old, and here we are in our 30s, 40s, and still are like, I haven't started the next great company. Am I behind? And this book's answer is no, we're not behind. Uh, in sort of this era of like hyper specialization, this is saying like it's actually helpful to be a generalist. It's helpful to have this diverse array of experiences to bring to bear on whatever it is you do settle on and decide to do. So for me, who wandered from psychology to sociology to forensics to cybersecurity and who knows what next, this is rang true for me. Drawing experiences from other entirely different fields of study have been helpful for solving problems in entirely unrelated fields as well. So this book to me was really good in terms of like, hey, you're not behind, you're doing great. Getting all the different diverse experiences you can is super helpful. This whole hyper specialized person who started doing this thing when they were 2 years old is rather like the exception rather than the rule, whereas we think of it the opposite.
Yeah, and but Gareth, like you might remember, we had a few guests, and the way they say it should be in this debate, generally specialists, is more like they like to say T-shaped,
Yes.
where it is
Wide and
like
deep.
a very
Yeah.
general, broad base that's wide, but then you still specialize into something. So I don't know what you think about that, Ryan.
Yep, absolutely. So this book's premise is like, be a generalist for as long as you possibly can, but then find the thing you're going to specialize in and draw from all those generalist experiences to be an even better specialist in that thing. So it's not to say don't become an expert, like truly do, but become a generalist first and then draw from all of that. You think of like a lot of the big problems in the world, and again, to draw a sociology theory here, the communities we're in tend to be very alike. So like in cybersecurity, I'm friends with other cybersecurity people and they're friends with other cybersecurity people. If I have a problem, I can ask them and they're going to give me answers that are very insularly cybersecurity community. But if you're a generalist and you have a diverse array of experiences, you can draw from other things you've done entirely unrelated, tennis, jujitsu, whatever, to maybe help you solve some of the problems in cybersecurity or tech.
Just going back to what your comment you made, about feeling like, well, I'm now in my 30s or my 40s and I've not created Facebook or whatever, Google, I haven't done these things. So am I not successful? But I don't remember the actual number, but I definitely saw an article a few years ago. They were actually looking at the data around inventions and ages of people that had created, significant inventions. And the number, and I'm fairly sure it was actually the peak was people in their 50s and 60s. It was something. It was much later than we think, and I think it's been skewed because tech companies. It's become a young person's game because obviously anybody can create. It's very easy to create a tech company, to write some software, host it somewhere, and build something. Whereas a lot of inventions have required labs and engineering, and that require a bit more money and time to build stuff. But yeah, there was an interesting stat around this that no, it's a lot of inventions tend to come to people who are older, who do have more life experience. So you still got plenty of time, Ryan. Don't worry. You can still invent. You can still invent some world class invention. You still have time for this. Don't worry.
Yeah, no, I completely believe that. This book has way better stats. I can never keep copies of this book because I give them away too quickly, so couldn't thumb through it and grab the stats out of it. But similar things in terms of like who really are successful at startups and coming up with the next big thing. They're always older than we really think they are, just because we see these examples like the Zuckerbergs or the whoever that are exceptionally young.
Yeah, and then of course you have Mozart. He was 5, wasn't he, or something, when he wrote his first symphony? I mean, just genius. So yeah.
Yep, and that's great, but don't worry, you don't have to be that to be good at whatever it is you do.
So just obviously the big thing at the moment is generative AI, LLMs. The company I work for, we're doing a lot of AI. We have 2 projects at the moment where we're incorporating LLMs into some of the stuff that we do. And you, again, I think I saw a video or a talk where you were talking about this. So I guess the first question is, do you think LLMs are going to provide a new source of security problems? And I'm not talking about those from the big companies necessarily, because they have guardrails around them, all the rest of it, but there are now open source. There's Mozilla just launched an open source version of Llama, I think, which was Facebook's LLM. And then there's things like XXX GPT and Wolf GPT that are used to create, scripts and all kinds of stuff. So do you do you see a whole new raft of security problems coming out of the sort of boom of generative AI?
Yeah, I'm going to take the super boring answer and say kind of. Because again,
Okay.
I think to be really effective at coming up with new threats, you kind of have to know what you're talking about. So it's not a case where we're going to see people just like, hey, can you come up with this cool new malware for me? You kind of have to be a little more involved and like, okay, well, what specifically are you trying to do? So I don't know if you've tried throwing coding problems at generative AI, but in my experience so far, it's been okay, give it piece by piece what you're trying to do. So if you're a bad guy, you're going to say, okay, I need a backdoor. I need it to do this, which you sort of have to know how a backdoor works in order to guide it. So I think it can be an enhancer for people that sort of know what they're talking about, but maybe don't have the skills to sit down and write it versus hey, ChatGPT, can you write me some code that will evade EDR and just be the next major worm that spreads worldwide? Like that's not going to happen. So it can
Yeah.
make script kiddies a little better. It's not making anyone like superhuman.
Yeah. No,
In
I
my
think that makes
experience.
sense. And then the other thing that's kind of an area of concern, right, is the data leakage in this. So obviously, prompts that people are sending potentially used for training data. I know OpenAI have now introduced some changes around this, and obviously there are enterprise LLMs now, Bedrock on AWS, where you can get around that. But there are going to be companies that are going to unknowingly expose some of their data right through this. Do you see this as a problem and maybe a lack of awareness?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is a thorny issue for sure. You're right, because you have to throw some data at it to train it to get it to do anything at all. And so how to get it to effectively do that without proprietary data that then leaks, it's a big issue. I don't have a simple answer for, but
Mm.
I think companies, at least knowing that, having their own policies in place or putting policies in place, what data are they going to train it on? What data are they going to use in their prompts? Where is that going to be stored? Is it going to be trained and sent elsewhere? Like, there's all definitely stuff to be aware of because they're very, very wide cases of accidental data exposure, which I
Yeah,
think we'll continue to see with this new AI sort of revolution.
that's good. I mean, Ryan. I mean, I had maybe one last thing to ask you. If you need to give advice to anybody who's not from the tech world, doesn't necessarily want to become a developer, but still want to go in tech in one way or another, like what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I would say there's so much in tech. There's so many different roles. You don't have to be a software engineer. You can come from sociology. You could come from law. I've seen, I'm sure you guys have as well, like people who have their MDs, their doctors, decide tech is for them. They make the jump in their 30s or 40s. So I'd say there's a lot of room for you, and it's never too late for you. Bring the experience you have to make you better at tech. Bring new solutions that we aren't thinking of.
On this sweet advice, we will leave you, Ryan. Thank you so much for coming today, and for anybody listening, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Bye bye.